We are finally here with part 2 of my crossbow guide for Call of Duty Modern Warfare. As stated in my previous video, this guide is more for Warzone and Ground War rather than multiplayer. In this video, I'll be covering sights, range finding, and zeroing with 6 different class setups for the crossbow. At the end of the video, I'll show my testing methods so you can test custom classes yourself in case you use attachments other than what I've shown. So let's get into it because we have a lot to cover. Starting with the sights, there are 3 basic sight types that are in Modern Warfare, 4 if you count thermals as their own category. We have reflex optics, which are short range sights with no magnification. Next are scout optics, which are medium range sights with 3 to 3.5 powered magnification. And lastly, there are sniper optics, which are long range sights with 4 powered magnification and above. My test will exclude short range sights since there are no markings to reference. As for medium range sights, I tested the VOK 3 powered, Thermal 3.25 powered, and Cronen 480 Pro 3.5 powered. And I excluded the other medium sights because in Modern Warfare, magnification doesn't actually affect the sight itself. How zoom level works in the game is the screen zooms in rather than the scope itself, meaning all medium range sights are actually the same magnification. When it comes to reticles, however, they have different markings in different places, which means zeroing changes based on reticle rather than magnification. I will be covering the reticles Angle Eye, Red Eye, and Blue V. I will not be covering the default reticle or reticles that have no definable markings. Yes, this means the T-pose. People who can make long-range crossbow shots with the T-pose aren't human. That leaves us with the long-range sights. I only tested 2, the 4-powered scope and variable zoom scope. Now I must add here that the variable zoom sight is a sight in the second focal plane. In terms of how scopes function, this means when you zoom in and out, the image changes. However, the reticle does not. This means each level of zoom has a different zero since the markings do not adjust for each level of zoom. As promised, here's a range finding guide I've made for the mid-range sights and the 4-powered sniper scope. So far, I have a mostly accurate range finding method that works up to 100 meters. I must add, only the 4-powered scope is 100% accurate with my testing. As you'll see, the mid-range scopes don't quite fit my method and become less accurate over longer distances. I didn't test the variable zoom scope since I would have to include 2 different sets of data for each zoom level, and at this point, I'm tired of testing range finding methods. I would like to add, before even using these methods, in Warzone you can just ping an enemy or location and it will give you the exact distance like a rangefinder. The following information is there just in case the ping isn't working, which sometimes happens with Windows. For others, sometimes knowing these range markings by heart can be faster than reading the ping. Lastly, pinging isn't an option in Ground War, so there is some benefit to learning this. With our mid-range sights, we'll be focusing on the scope as a whole rather than the reticle itself. I tried using a method consisting of fourths and increments at 25 meters. We will break down our scope into fourths starting from the center, going down. I know this is technically eighths, but nobody uses the top of the scope. At 25 meters, a standing person fits from their knees at the scope's edge to the center. Honestly, at this range, just shoot. He's very close, and you don't need to worry about range at this distance. At 50 meters, a person covers approximately 3/4 of the scope. At 75 meters, a person slightly covers less than 1/2 of the scope. It's safe to assume half the scope is still within 5 meters, which wouldn't make much of a difference. At 100 meters, a person covers roughly 5/8 of a scope. His feet are halfway between the half and 1/4 line. I know this is really specific, so to make things simpler, let's just say slightly above the halfway mark. And that's where we'll stop with the range finding for the mid-range sights, since going beyond that will only get less and less accurate with this method. Now we're on to the better sight for range finding, the 4-powered scope. The markings on the sight seem to be made for this too, as the markings almost perfectly match each range I tested, meaning the rule of 25 was working. At 25 meters, a standing person fits from the center of the scope to the bottom of the scope's edge. At 50 meters, a standing person's feet will touch the tip of the black line. At 75 meters, a standing person's feet will touch the 4th dot, and finally, at 100 meters, they will touch the 3rd dot. I really like how well this sight works for estimating ranges, and I wonder if this pattern will continue at longer ranges, but I haven't found a controlled environment to test this. I would like to remind you again, if you're playing Warzone, to just ping the location for 100% accuracy. It leaves out the chance for human error. And with range finding out of the way, we can move on to zeros. So in this section, we're covering the zeros, which is where you need to aim on the scope. We're finally at the part of why you're probably here. This section is a bit long and dry, but it took me months to test and retest. Feel free to take screenshots or ask any questions in the comments, as I will be happy to answer them. Each image will only be up for a few seconds to keep this section as brief as possible. We're going to cover 6 different classes along with 5 sights and 3 reticles. I'll be organizing this by class, so if you're interested in a specific class, you can skip right to there. However, I will recommend watching all of them to get a better understanding of how the attachments influence the accuracy and velocity of the bolt. I will also be including a general accuracy rating, so you can get a better understanding of what range to utilize each class. And the colors are as follows. Green, meaning you will always be able to hit a headshot. Yellow, meaning you may miss a headshot, but will always hit a body shot. Orange, meaning body shots are recommended, but you may miss or are likely to hit a limb. And red, meaning you may miss your target completely, body shots are inaccurate, and hits are pure chance. Something to note about accuracy, much like shotgun slugs, there is a lot of randomness to the shot, so the 0 markings are where the shots landed most consistently. I did not include a potential grouping size because things will get too complicated, and I wanted to keep a clean guide to show you. If you want, I can include that data in another video. Starting with the 6 classes. Class 1 is our basic crossbow, no special attachments are equipped. Class 2 has Fury bolts equipped. Class 3 has a 200-pound arm attachment. Class 4 has the 16-strand cable along with the 200-pound arms. Class 5, which is the most common Warzone setup, has the Fury bolts, along with the 200-pound arms. And finally, Class 6, which is my Warzone class, has the Fury bolts, 200-pound arms, and the 16-strand cable. Starting with the 4-powered scope, we can see that each of these dots is zeroed almost exactly to each range increment, 25, 50, 75, and 100 meters respectively. This sight will be the only one properly marked for this class. It seems that this is what the scope and weapon was designed around. The default VOK sight has a faster ADS speed, but is harder to read at greater ranges. As you demonstrate with a 3.5 powered sight, we can see the zeros for the 3 reticles, Angle Eye, Red Eye, and Blue V. Starting with the Angle Eye, I think this is best for close to medium range because the chevron works best up to 50 meters with most classes. Next is the Red Eye. I consider this reticle similar to the 4-powered scope, and the even lines make it easy to read. For the last of the mid-range reticles, we have the Blue V. It combines the benefits of using a chevron and having clear, even lines like the Red Eye. Next up, we have the default thermal sight. After the large center ring, the rest of the sight doesn't quite match. Our variable zoom scope is the final sight, starting with the low 3-powered zoom, and next is the high 6.1 powered zoom. While I show the zeros for this class, I'm just going to complain about these bolts for a bit. These explosive bolts are terrible on their own. They begin to initially drop around 15 meters, and it only gets worse from there. There's a large inaccuracy penalty when using these, and they have the worst velocity penalty out of any attachment. Even at 25 meters, you have a small chance to miss a headshot. These bolts only get worse at longer ranges, and are practically unusable at 100 meters. Class 3 has roughly the same accuracy as the default crossbow, with the benefits of not having to compensate as much due to a 20% velocity increase. So while splitting up the audio, I realized there's going to be some awkward silences between classes. So I'm just going to turn up the music and enjoy. Class 4 gives us our best range to accuracy ratio, and with headshots being very reliable even at 100 meters. I will consider this the best sniper class for the crossbow, especially for ground war. Combining the Fury bolts with the 200-pound arms gives it better range, but it still suffers from the accuracy penalties at longer ranges. As popular as this class is, it suffers after 50 meters. Here we have the crossbow I use for Warzone. The 16-strand cable counters the accuracy penalties to the Fury bolts, while only being slightly less accurate than our sniper class. The 200-pound arms balance the velocity loss from the other 2 attachments, making the zeros similar to the default crossbow. So
So I get asked a lot why I don't use the 28 strand cables, and 28 strand cables is all that matters with velocity. So as a bonus, I'm going to include my testing for the 28 strand cable and the 200-pound arms. This is not even including the accuracy penalty for the Fury bolts either. So in theory, it can get worse than this, and I'll just let these results speak for themselves.
In this section, we'll cover velocity and leading your shot. The term leading means aiming ahead of your target so your bullet, or in this case bolt, will hit your target at a distance. Leading is directly influenced by velocity and distance, so fair warning, it involves a lot of math and practical testing. I'll try to keep it brief and give a quick overview, but for those of you who want the exact numbers, I'll display them on screen. The math was based on Class 1, however, Class 6 has a similar velocity, meaning in theory, this should work for both classes. So the base crossbow has a starting velocity of 137 meters per second. The time it took to hit the target at 100 meters was about 0.8 seconds. This will be our flight time at 100 meters. Next, a player sprinting normally at 100% movement speed moves at about 6.5 meters per second. In our flight time of 0.8 seconds, the player would have moved 5.4 meters perpendicular to us. Estimating that our player model is roughly half a meter wide, you would need to aim roughly 11 player models ahead to hit him. However, given how small multiplayer maps are, I could not reliably test this, so we would consider this working in theory. But I can't just leave it at that, so I decided to downscale it to 50 meters, which is a reasonable medium distance. Also, at 50 meters, I can reliably capture footage on most maps, so I can show you the results in action. Using the same formula at 50 meters with some number changes, we instead need to aim roughly 6 player models ahead. I aim at the 50 meter zero and about 6 player models ahead, and just like in theory, we connect spot on. If you want a simple and practical way to remember this, at 50 meters, just fire as he enters past the edge of the scope roughly here, and it should hit. At 100 meters, fire when he can no longer be seen by the edge of the scope. What all this means is if your target is running, then at most ranges you should lead around the edge of your scope, and if you know the range, you can determine if you need to fire on or within the edge. Again, I need to reiterate, I was not able to test this at longer ranges due to map constraints. Chapter 5 is all about my testing methods, how I tested various ranges, and what I use as targets when I don't have another player around. Before you even pick a map, you should change the game mode settings to unlimited time and equipment recharge rates to ×10, so you're not waiting around forever. These are my game settings for testing, but you can change them based on personal preference. For targets, I use a deployable shield along with a spray called Dead Center from Season 1. If you don't have this one, then an alternative that can be used is called Try Me, which is earned by completing the 6 Expert Gunsmith Challenge. As for what map to pick, for ranges up to 75 meters I pick Grozna Raid, and for the last 100 meter range I pick Anaya Palace. At 25 meters I'm standing next to the flag, touching the dumpster, and my target is touching the first wall. At 50 meters my back is touching the building, my feet are at the traffic cone, and my target is touching the furthest wall. At 75 meters I am standing just behind this light pole, and my target is touching the red barricade. At 100 meters, this is a bit of a walk. I'm just going to mark it on the map, then show you. From this spot, just before the third column from the corner is your starting point. Then, following the stream, just before the white rock, there's a brown rock connected to a wall. Next to this brown rock is about 100 meters. If anyone found another reliable line of sight for 100 meters or beyond with objects to reference near it, please let me know. I was keeping solo testers in mind when doing this, since that's how I start most of my testing. So as for my final thoughts, I don't really have much in terms of wrapping this up since most of this was pretty straightforward. I know this is a lot of information to cover, and I hope this guide helped you understand the crossbow better. I hope to see a lot more crossbow users out there and more newcomers wanting to try the weapon out. If you know anyone who wants to get better with the crossbow or wants to learn how to use it, show them this guide. Again, I try to keep this video as short as possible, but I had a lot to cover. And one last thing before I go, I do plan on making a part 3 to this guide. Part 3 will be the final installment, and will include some minor revisions to part 1, sound testing, and detailed shot groupings. If you want to see me test or include certain things in the next video, please let me know. I'm open to new ideas, and I will see what I can put together. So please, comment down below what you'll be looking forward to learning for my next guide. Not only does it help me get ideas for the video, but it'll help you too if I include it in the next video, and commenting helps this video in the dreaded algorithm. And don't worry, part 3 should be much shorter than this one. Take care, and happy hunting.